There was a plain table at the front of Enos Byler's front room that morning, pushed up against the wall where the stovepipe turns, and a row of black books laid out along it in a straight line, spines even, the way a woman lays out forks. It was the last Sunday in October, cold enough that the windows had gone gray with our breathing, and communion was behind us, and the benches had been turned around to face that table. I was 24 years old. I sat on the women's side with my hands folded in my lap and the ribbons of my cap hanging loose, and I looked at those books the way every other woman in that room was looking at them, which is to say steadily, and without once turning my head. All of us knew what was folded inside one of them, not which one. Only that everything I would be for the rest of my life was already lying on that table, in a room I was sitting in, and that not one person, at any point, had asked me a single thing about it. Aaron and I were married in November in his mother's front room, and by the following autumn, I had learned most of what a young wife in this district is expected to learn: how the Ordnung is spoken of and how it is actually kept, whose kitchen the bench wagon goes to next, how long to let the coffee stand before you pour it out for the men. What I had not learned yet was the shape of a communion Sunday. Fall communion is a long day. It starts early and it does not hurry. And when it is finished, the district does not simply go home. The members stay. The children and the unbaptized go out into the yard, and the door is shut. And what happens after that is the members' meeting, and it belongs only to those who have knelt and been taken in. At my first one, I did not know what was being decided. I only knew that the women around me had gone very quiet, and that the minister had risen and gone to stand at the door with his hands behind his back. One at a time, the members got up and went to him. Some leaned close. Some spoke without leaning at all. Each one came back and sat down and folded their hands, and nobody said anything to anybody. An older woman on the bench beside me put 2 fingers on my sleeve and told me in Pennsylvania Dutch that I could go up too, that I was a member now, that I could give a name. A name for what? I asked her. For a minister, she said. Whoever you think the Lord would have. I had finished the 8th grade at 14, and I had been a wife since November, and I stood in that line with my heart going hard against my ribs. I whispered a name I barely knew into a man's ear, and I sat back down, and the whole of it took 9 seconds. That was my voice, all of it, the entire portion of it, once in a great while, at a door, in a whisper, about somebody else's life. I did not have a word for it yet. 5 autumns later, I knew that day the way you know a hymn you never once chose to sing. I knew that the members' meeting after fall communion is where the district takes up whatever it has been carrying since spring, and that when a district is short a minister, that is where the nomination happens. We had been short since Christmas, when old Dan Miller's heart gave out in his own milk house with the lanterns still lit. All summer, nobody said out loud that a nomination was coming. Everybody said it a different way. Somebody would mention, over the canning kettles, that Enos had a settled way of talking to the young men. Somebody would say that Levi never yet left a job half done. You would hear the same 3 names in 3 different kitchens in 1 month, and never once as a suggestion. That is how the voices gather in a district, long before the day, in kitchens, over jars. At the meeting, the ministers stood apart, one at the door and one by the stove, and we went to them by turns. I let 2 older women go ahead of me. Then it was my turn, and I leaned in close to his ear, and I said, as quietly as I have ever said anything, Levi. I want to be honest about the reason. Levi is a good man and a steady one, and I have never in my life had cause to think otherwise. But that is not the whole of why his name was the one in my mouth. I said Levi because Levi is not Aaron. I went back to the women's bench and sat down with my hands in my lap and my face doing nothing at all, and I was ashamed of myself in a way I could not have explained to a single person in that room. Then I looked down the bench, and I understood something else. There were 4 or 5 of us there who had heard the same names all summer, over the same kettles. We already knew, every one of us, which wives were about to have a hard year. We did not look at each other. We looked at the table. When the last member had gone up, the ministers stood together in the corner with their heads down, and the counting did not take long. In our district, it takes 3 voices to put a man in the lot. The bishop turned around and said the names out loud into that quiet room, and there were 4 of them, and the second one was my husband's. I want to say plainly what that means, because it is not a promotion, and there is no ceremony in it afterward. It is for life. There is no pay, and there is no training and no school for it, and no way to prepare. A man does not put his own name forward, and he cannot take it back down. If the lot falls on him, he stands up a minister that same hour, in the same coat he wore in, and he preaches the next time it is our district's turn, whether he has ever spoken in front of people or not. And a minister's wife is not a title, it is a house. Her kitchen becomes a public kitchen. Her table is where other people set their troubles down, at any hour, and her Saturdays stop being hers to plan. I had sat in Melinda's kitchen. I knew what her back looked like at the sink at 9 at night with people still at her table. If you are watching this and something in your own life was settled in a room where you were not asked to say anything, a move, a calling, a farm sold, a job taken, a name put forward, then I would like very much to know it. Subscribe if these stories are for you, and tell me down in the comments what was decided about your life while you sat right there and listened. I read every one of them. I sit with them longer than you would think. I was frightened. That is the plain truth of it, and I had nowhere on this earth to put it, because in our district being frightened of a thing like that sounds like refusing it, and refusing it sounds like refusing God. The bishop went to the table. There were 4 black books on it, and there had been 4 names, and he took them up one at a time and squared them and set them back down, and then he moved them around one another with his hands flat, the way you would shuffle a thing you were not permitted to be careless with. Nobody spoke. Somewhere behind me, a bench creaked, and a baby made a small sound, and a mother stood up with it and went out through the washroom so the room could keep still. Inside one of those 4, folded once, was a slip of paper with a verse written on it. That is the lot. Das Los. The disposing of it is of the Lord, and every soul in that room believed it, and I believed it too. I want that understood. Nobody in Enos Byler's front room meant any harm to anybody that morning. It was not a trick, and there was no cruelty in it anywhere. The bishop set them down in a row and said the men could come. They came up one at a time and each took a chair behind the table, facing us. Aaron went second. I watched my husband's back cross that room, his coat pulled a little tight across the shoulders from where I had washed it, and he sat down and took the hymnal in front of him into both hands and held it in his lap without opening it, and he looked at the floorboards. I tried to pray. I want to be truthful about how that went. I said the words I was supposed to say, "Thy will be done," and they came out of me flat and would not lie down straight, because underneath them the whole time was another sentence I could not stop, which was please not us, please not our house. I said thy will be done, and I meant please not us. I do not know what to call that. I have never told anybody until now. And then I made myself look at the other 3 wives, 3 women on that bench, sitting perfectly still, their hands folded exactly like mine, all 4 of us looking at a row of books on a table, and not one of us breathing. The bishop went to the first man and opened his hymnal, and it was plain. He went to the second, which was Aaron, and he took it out of my husband's hands and opened it and turned it, and it was plain. The third was plain. He came to Levi last, at the end of the row, and opened it, and the slip was there, and he lifted it out between 2 fingers and read the verse aloud, and Levi went the color of ash and did not move at all. Behind me, on the women's bench, Susan made a sound. It was not a cry. It was smaller than that and much worse, a short breath in, the sound a person makes who has been struck somewhere that does not show. And she was quiet again inside of 2 seconds, and I have heard it in my kitchen at odd hours for years since. What I felt was not relief. I want to be honest about that too. What I felt first was my own hands, shaking so hard that I had to press them flat against my legs to stop them, and then shame that they had shaken at all, because a woman who trusts the Lord's disposing of it is not supposed to have hands like that. Afterward, while the benches were being turned back and the coffee went around, I carried a dishpan out to the washroom, and Melinda was there, drying cups. She has been a minister's wife 20 years. She took the pan from me and set it down and looked at me a moment, and then she said it quietly, without one drop of pity in it. "You were allowed to be afraid, child," she said. "No one ever asked me either." I did not say anything. She kept drying the cups. 20 years ago, she said, she sat on a bench just like that one and found out what the rest of her life would be at the same instant as everybody else, from clear across a room, watching a man's hands open a hymnal. Nobody asked her beforehand whether she could carry it. Nobody has asked her since whether she has been able to, and that is when I understood what had actually happened to me that morning, and it was not what I thought. I had not been spared anything. Nothing had been decided in my favor. The arrangement is that a wife's whole life can be settled in a room she is sitting in without one word to her, and this time it simply landed on somebody else's bench. That night, after the little one was asleep and Aaron had come in from the barn, I told him I had been afraid. I said it in plain words at the kitchen table with the lamp between us. I was afraid all morning, and afraid of what would happen to us, and I did not know where to put it. He did not get angry. I think I had expected anger, or a verse. What happened instead was that he sat back and went quiet a long time, and when he did speak, his voice had gone thin, and he said he had not once thought about the morning as a thing that was happening to me. He had been so far inside his own dread that it had not occurred to him that I was sitting out there having a life decided too. He did not make a speech about it. He is not a man who makes speeches. He got up and put another stick in the stove and stood there with his back to me a while. What changed was small, and nobody wrote it down anywhere. In the spring, when he heard from a cousin that his name was being said again in kitchens, he told me that same evening, standing in the washroom with his hat still on. He said, "I would rather you heard it from me at home than found it out sitting on a bench." That is all it was. It was enough. It is still enough. And in November, I baked a pie and had Aaron drive me over to Levi and Susan's place in the buggy, and I sat down in her kitchen, and I did not talk about the calling or about God's will or about what a blessing it would be. I asked her the question that nobody had asked either one of us. I asked her how she was, about it, in herself. And Susan put both hands flat on her table and cried for about a minute, and then we had the pie. I am telling you this because I know how many of you have had a whole life handed to you sideways. Your husband took the posting, or the pulpit, or the farm his father left, and the two of you moved, and you packed the house and learned a new church and a new store and a new road home. Somebody stood up somewhere and settled it, and by the time it reached you, it was already decided, and the only question left was whether you would carry it well. And the fear that came after, the sitting up at night, the tightness when the letter came, somebody told you that fear was a failure of your faith. It was not. I want to say that as plainly as I know how. Fear is not the opposite of obedience. You can be afraid of a thing all the way through and still get up and do it every day for 20 years. That is not weakness. I say no word against my husband, who did not choose that morning either, and none against our bishop, who has to stand at that table and hold those hymnals and does not get to want anything. The Amish community I married into is the same community that taught me to carry a pie to a neighbor's door and to sit down when I got there. No cruel man did this to me. It is water we were all born standing in, and none of us dug it. But I think about Melinda, 20 years in a public kitchen, and no one ever asked her whether she could carry it. The asking would have cost this district nothing. So I am asking, if you are the woman whose life was settled while she sat there listening, you were allowed to be afraid, and you still are. I did not have a word for it back then, on that bench, with my hands going. I have a word for it now. There is more of this than fits in one October morning, the whispering at the door, the years of kitchens, the things a wife in a plain district learns to carry without ever naming them out loud. I wrote it all down, as honestly as I could, in my book, A Quiet and Faithful Home. If those pages might be any comfort to you, the full story is in the pinned comment below. Thank you for sitting with me through this one, and for listening to a quiet morning as carefully as you would listen to a loud one.